Before the story you're about to hear, subscribe to Pure Revenge Stories and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. I read every single one. I've been a quiet man my whole life. 63 years of minding my own business, paying my taxes, keeping my head down. My wife used to say I was the kind of man who'd let someone cut in line at the grocery store just to avoid the conversation. She wasn't wrong. Eleanor passed 8 years ago, and after that it was just me and my son Philip. That boy was everything I had left. Everything. So when Philip called me on a Thursday evening last spring and said, "Dad, I need you to meet someone. Someone important," I drove 2 hours to his apartment without a second thought. I brought a bottle of good wine, got a haircut that same afternoon. I was ready to like whoever walked through that door. Her name was Gwendolyn. She came in wearing a silk blouse the color of cream, hair perfectly set, heels that clicked on Philip's hardwood floors like little announcements. She was 31. Beautiful, in the way that makes you slightly nervous. She shook my hand with both of hers and said, "I've heard so much about you. Philip talks about you constantly." She had a smile that hit you right in the chest. Warm. Practiced. I didn't know the difference yet. We had dinner. She was charming. Asked about my work. I spent 30 years in civil engineering, retired at 61. She said she admired men who built things. She laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones. By the end of the night, Philip was watching me with this hopeful look on his face, like a kid waiting to find out if the dog gets to stay. I told him on the drive home, through the phone, that I liked her. I meant it. They got engaged 4 months later. I still remember exactly where I was when Philip called. Sitting on my back porch, watching the evening come in over the yard Eleanor used to keep so beautifully. He was practically vibrating through the phone. She said, "Yes, Dad." She said yes. I cried a little. Didn't tell him that. But I did. The Sunday lunch was her idea. Gwendolyn called me directly, which I thought was a nice touch. She said she wanted to celebrate properly, wanted me to meet her mother, wanted it to feel like family. She named a restaurant downtown. One of those places with no prices on the menu. I wore the blazer Eleanor bought me for our 35th anniversary. I wanted to look like I belonged there. Her mother, Rosalind, was already seated when I arrived. Late 60s, maybe 70. Thin in the way wealthy women sometimes are, deliberate about it. Diamonds at her ears. She looked at me the way people look at furniture they're considering donating. She shook my hand and said, "Philip speaks highly of you," the way someone reads from a card. Gwendolyn was radiant. Philip was nervous, though I only recognized that later. At the time, I thought he was just excited. We ordered. We made small talk. Rosalind told me about their house in Connecticut, about Gwendolyn's years in Europe, about a family trip to Tuscany they took every summer. I talked about Philip, about how proud I was of him, about the house I was planning to leave him one day. I should have kept my mouth shut about the house. The food came. The wine came. And then, about 40 minutes in, Gwendolyn set down her fork, very gently, folded her hands on the table, and looked at me with those warm eyes and said, "We've been thinking so much about the wedding, what that day should look like." I smiled. I said that was wonderful. Rosalind said, "Our family has certain traditions." I kept smiling. I said I understood, that I looked forward to hearing about them. Gwendolyn reached into her bag and placed a folder on the table. Not a brochure, not a magazine page torn out with a circled photo. A folder, cream-colored, thick. She slid it across to me. I opened it. The number at the top of the first page was $1.9 million. I thought I'd misread it. I actually blinked and looked again. Itemized. Venue. Catering. Floral arrangements. Photographer, videographer, live orchestra, custom gown, rehearsal dinner, honeymoon. Line by line. $1.9 million. And below it, handwritten in ink, family contribution expected. $950,000. Half. They wanted me to pay half of a $1.9 million wedding. I looked up at Gwendolyn, then at Rosalind. Neither of them looked uncomfortable. That was the thing that hit me hardest. No hesitation, no apology in their eyes. This was, to them, a conversation. A normal one. I looked at Philip. He was staring at his plate. I opened my mouth. I genuinely do not know what I was going to say. Something careful, probably. Something that wouldn't make a scene. Old habits. And then I felt it. A pressure on my right foot. Deliberate. Philip's shoe against mine under the table. Slow. Firm. The way you'd press a button. I looked at him again. He still didn't look up, but his right hand moved from his lap to the edge of the table, and between his fingers, folded very small, was a piece of paper. He slid it toward my hand without moving his arm. I covered it with my palm like it was nothing, like I dropped my napkin and picked it up. I unfolded it under the table with one hand. 6 words. Dad, she's been lying to me. I set the paper in my lap. I picked up my wine glass. I took a long, slow sip. Rosalind was watching me with that same evaluating look. Gwendolyn was talking, something about the venue deposit needing to be placed by the end of the month. But I had stopped hearing the words. I set the glass down. I smiled at both of them. I said, "This is wonderful. I'd love a few days to look everything over." Gwendolyn looked relieved. Rosalind looked satisfied. Philip finally looked up, and the expression on his face was not what I expected. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't apology. It was something that looked a lot like relief. We didn't talk until I was in my car. Philip texted me before I even pulled out of the parking structure. "Can you come to my apartment? Tonight, please." I was there in 20 minutes. He opened the door looking like he hadn't slept in a week. I sat down at his kitchen table, same table Eleanor helped him pick out when he first moved in, and he sat across from me and started talking. He'd been piecing it together for 2 months. It started small. Gwendolyn had moved in with him 7 months ago. Shortly after the engagement, she handled the bills. Her idea, she said she was better at organization, and Philip handed over access to his checking account. He made good money as a project manager. He trusted her completely. The first thing he noticed was a charge on his account statement that he didn't recognize, an online transfer to an account he didn't know. He asked Gwendolyn about it. She had an answer immediately, too immediately, he said. Some subscription service. He let it go. Then a second one. 3 weeks later. Different account number. Same vague answer. He started looking more carefully. He pulled 3 months of statements and sat with them for a whole weekend while Gwendolyn was visiting her mother in Connecticut. What he found turned his stomach. 47 transactions over 7 months. Transfers ranging from $200 to $4,800. Some to accounts he'd never seen. Some to Venmo handles that didn't match any contact on her phone. Some labeled utilities or groceries in amounts that made no sense. He added them up 3 times because he kept hoping he'd made a mistake. He hadn't. $63,400. $63,000 moved out of his account in small amounts, quietly, over 7 months. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the boutique. About 3 months into their engagement, Gwendolyn had asked Philip to invest in a friend's clothing business. Startup opportunity. She'd shown him a business plan, a website, photographs of the product line. She'd been so excited about it. He'd given her $40,000. When he went looking, the website was gone. The business registration she'd shown him had a company name that didn't match any record in any state database. The address on the paperwork was a UPS store in New Jersey. There was no boutique. There was no friend. He sat at his kitchen table staring at me, and I watched my son, my careful, kind, practical son, who'd never asked me for a single thing he didn't earn, look like something inside him had come unmoored. He was not asking me what to do. He was just finally letting himself say it out loud to someone. I asked him one question. I asked him why he hadn't come to me sooner. He said, Because I kept thinking I was wrong. I kept hoping I was wrong. I understood that. I understood it completely. I told him to go to his bedroom and get me every bank statement he had going back to the beginning of the engagement. I told him not to say anything to Gwendolyn yet. I told him to act normal. He asked me if I had a plan. I told him I was 63 years old, and I'd spent 30 years solving engineering problems with incomplete information. I'd figure something out. I spent the next 2 weeks being very quiet and very busy. The first thing I did was call a friend of mine who'd retired from the county DA's office. We'd known each other for 30 years, used to fish together before his knees went bad. I didn't tell him everything. I told him enough. He made 2 phone calls and then called me back and told me the name I should look for. A forensic accountant he'd worked with. Good. Thorough. Discreet. Her name was Dr. Patricia. Wait, I cannot use that name. Her name was Dr. Annalise Voss. She agreed to meet with me the following Saturday morning. Philip brought everything. Statements, screenshots, the paperwork for the fake boutique, emails he'd saved without knowing exactly why he'd saved them. She sat across from us for 3 hours and didn't say much. She had a legal pad and a mechanical pencil, and she wrote constantly. At the end, she looked at Philip and said, very calmly, "This is a pattern I recognize. Has she asked for a large sum of money recently?" Philip looked at me. I told her about the folder. The $950,000. She nodded like she'd expected it. That's the endgame ask. The wedding budget is a mechanism. It's designed to extract a large lump sum legitimately, before anything else surfaces. She tapped her pencil against the pad. They usually do this right when they know the smaller thefts are about to be noticed. She started talking about wire fraud, about financial exploitation. She said she'd seen this before. Not often, but enough. A certain kind of calculated approach. A certain kind of target. She said something that I've thought about every day since. She said, "This isn't impulsive. This is practiced." Philip didn't say anything for a long time after that. The second thing I did was hire an attorney. A good one. A woman who specialized in fraud cases and who had a voice like a closed door. Calm, final. She reviewed everything Dr. Voss compiled. She told us that what we had was substantial, but that we needed to move carefully. She said the moment we showed our hand, Gwendolyn would likely disappear with whatever she'd already taken. We needed to coordinate. She coordinated with Dr. Voss. They brought in a contact at the Financial Crimes Unit. I paid for all of it. I didn't tell Philip how much. It doesn't matter. You don't put a price on your son. For 2 weeks, Philip went home to that apartment every night and sat across from Gwendolyn at dinner and talked about venue options and guest lists and whether they should have a band or a DJ. He told me later it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. I believe him. He's not built for deception. He has Eleanor's honesty in him. All of it. Gwendolyn apparently had no such difficulty. During those same 2 weeks, Dr. Voss found 3 more things. First, the account the transfers had been going to ultimately fed into an account in Gwendolyn's name, not her legal name, a variation of it, a name she'd used before in a previous state, attached to a complaint filed by a former partner that had never gone to prosecution because the partner had chosen not to pursue it. Second, Rosalind was not her mother. Or rather, they were not related by blood, neighbors apparently for many years in Connecticut, an arrangement of some kind that I never fully understood. The family traditions and the family contribution. A script. One they'd used before. Third, and this one I still think about differently than the others, the business plan Gwendolyn had shown Philip for the boutique, the photographs, the fake registration documents. The formatting was identical, down to the font, to documents found in that earlier complaint from the previous state. She had a template. She used it more than once. On a Tuesday morning in October, Philip told Gwendolyn he needed her to come to his attorney's office to sign some paperwork related to the engagement. He said it was routine, a financial disclosure his attorney recommended. She came without hesitation. She wore the cream-colored blouse. She walked into a conference room and found my attorney, Dr. Voss, a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit, and me. I watched her face in the half-second before her expression closed. That half-second told me everything. There was no surprise. There was calculation. Immediate. Rapid calculation. The way a person scans a room for exits. She didn't find one. My attorney placed a document in front of her. Dr. Voss placed her analysis beside it. The detective identified himself and read her rights. Gwendolyn looked at me across the table. I don't know what she expected. Anger, maybe. Or satisfaction. I felt neither. I felt tired, mostly. And sad, not for her, but for the version of this story where none of it had happened, where the cream-colored blouse and the warm handshake and the clicked heels had been real. She asked if she could call her attorney. We said of course. She was charged with wire fraud, theft by deception, and filing fraudulent documents. Rosalind, once investigators located her, faced related charges. The DA's office determined this was not the first time they'd operated this arrangement. There had been at least 2 other men. One in Pennsylvania, one in Georgia. Both had settled quietly, embarrassed, unwilling to go public. Philip was not embarrassed. Philip was angry, and his anger was clean and righteous, and he let it do what anger is supposed to do. It walked him straight into a courtroom, and it sat with him while he gave his statement, and it didn't leave until the judge handed down the sentence. 14 months for Gwendolyn. Rosalind received a suspended sentence and restitution order. The $63,400 was partially recovered. The $40,000 from the fake boutique, we recovered all of it, eventually through civil proceedings. It took time, but we got it. I still have the note. 6 words on a torn corner of paper, the handwriting a little uneven because he wrote it under a table in a restaurant where everything cost too much and nothing was what it appeared to be. Dad. She's been lying to me. I keep it in the drawer of my nightstand, next to the photograph of Eleanor I've kept there since she passed. I don't know exactly why. Maybe because that little piece of paper is the moment my son chose to trust me when he was most afraid. Maybe because I want to remember what it felt like to actually be useful, to be the thing I was always supposed to be for him. He's doing well now. He moved to a different apartment. He's cautious in the way people get when they've been hurt by something they didn't see coming. That's going to take time. I know it. He knows it. We don't talk about it directly much. We talk around it, the way men of a certain generation do. We go to dinner on Sundays. He calls when he's on his drive home from work. Last month, he told me he'd met someone at his gym. He said she seemed nice. He said it carefully, the way you say something you're not sure you should say yet. I told him I looked forward to meeting her, and I meant it. But I kept the note. Here's what I want to say to anyone listening to this who might have a child going through something similar, or who feels like the quiet approach is always the right one. Sometimes it is, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is to get very still and very smart, and let the truth do the work it was always going to do anyway. Gwendolyn thought she was looking at a quiet old man who'd let someone cut in line at the grocery store. She was right about the grocery store. She was wrong about everything else. Subscribe to Pure Revenge Stories if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are right now? And if you've ever had to protect someone you love from someone who wore a very convincing smile, I'd like to hear about it. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened at that table. Not the legal part, the human part, because the legal part is straightforward enough. Gwendolyn made choices, repeatedly, over a long stretch of time, and those choices had a cost she eventually had to pay. That's not complicated. What's complicated is understanding how someone gets to that point, how a person learns to look a father in the eye across a restaurant table and slide a folder full of numbers toward him and feel nothing at all. I don't think Gwendolyn was born that way. I'm not sure anyone is. But somewhere along the way, she made a decision, probably a small one at first, that deceiving someone was easier than earning something. And then she made that decision again and again, until it wasn't a decision anymore. It was just the way she moved through the world. That's what dishonesty does when you let it go unchecked. it doesn't stay small. It grows into its own kind of logic, its own set of justifications, until the person living inside it can't even see it clearly anymore. Philip, on the other hand, made a different kind of choice. He was scared. He'd lost $63,000 and $40,000 more, and he was lying in that apartment every night next to someone he no longer trusted. And instead of running or exploding or falling apart, he did something quietly courageous. He wrote 6 words on a piece of paper and passed it to his father under a table. That took more strength than most people will ever give him credit for. It takes real backbone to admit you've been fooled by someone you loved. It takes even more to ask for help. I think about the men in Pennsylvania and Georgia, the ones who chose not to pursue it, who walked away embarrassed. I understand that impulse completely. Shame is a powerful silencer. But silence, in situations like this, is not the same as peace. It's just postponed harm. Those men's silence gave Gwendolyn and Rosalind the confidence to keep going, to find the next person, to print the same template with a different name at the top. What I keep coming back to is this: intelligence without integrity is just a sharper tool for causing damage. Gwendolyn was smart. She was organized, patient, convincing. She had a system, but she used every bit of that intelligence in the service of taking from people instead of building anything real. And so all that capability, all that energy, it collapsed in on itself. It always does. Not because the universe is keeping score in some mystical ledger, but because deception requires constant maintenance. You have to keep every lie consistent with every other lie. You have to manage every person's perceptions simultaneously. Eventually, the load gets too heavy. Something slips, and a quiet 63-year-old man who spent 30 years solving engineering problems with incomplete information starts doing the math. The thing I want Philip to carry forward, and maybe anyone listening who's been hurt by someone they trusted, is this: being deceived doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. The question is what you do with the moment you find out. Do you let shame close you off? Or do you let honesty open something back up? Philip chose honesty even when it cost him. That choice is the thing I'm proudest of. Not the investigation, not the courtroom, not the recovered money. That folded piece of paper. 6 words. The courage to tell the truth to someone who loved him. That's the only inheritance that actually matters.